Hi, I'm Gurdeep Pandher. I'm championing the novel Hotline for Canada Read 2023. Dimitri Nasrallah, the author of Hotline, joins me now. Hello, Dimitri. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Gurdeep? Nice to meet you here.
I'm doing fantastic. Very nice to meet you as well. Hotline is unique in that it depicts an uplifting immigration story. Why was this something you wanted to represent?
I wanted to go in completely the other direction of what I'd done before. So I wanted people to look at something very small and very real and not dress it up with any epic tales of a journey or things that made it fantastic in nature. I just wanted a clear picture of what immigration feels like in the first year, especially, without looking away and without dressing it up, and to say, there's a story here, and it's a story that involves some of the great perseverance we never talk about in our society, and it requires a lot of dignity and quiet confidence and faith. I was surprised by how many people afterwards felt as though it hadn't been represented yet, even though so many people live this experience. It revealed to me this division in society by those who know this story and those who don't.
I totally can relate to these experiences. I went through some of them myself, and I totally agree with your point that these experiences are universal. But sometimes there's a gap. There's a gap in understanding how newcomers' life and people who are settled there for many generations. The challenges can be different, the barriers can be different, just access to very basic things such as food, education, medical, doctor. These can be different. I remember my experiences when I was new. My English was sort of broken. I had so hard time making people understand myself, and then understanding people. And sometimes those expressions were different. Those early year, first, second, or third year navigations, they can be unique. They can test someone's ability to adapt. They can test your strength. They can test how you can adapt to new environment, or you can find your own way in that new environment.
One of the things that I find is different now than in the 80s when this book is set and when I first encountered these situations is that unlike the book, when my parents arrived here, they didn't ask for help from anyone. And it was almost as though they bought into this silent shame that comes along with being new here, and they didn't want to expose that to other people. You pretend that you know the culture more than you do, so you can almost get a pass, and you think that acceptance will happen that way. So society was much more one-sided at that point, especially in the 80s, in that there was a definite cultural center and there was margins. And that's changing in some ways, but it hasn't changed completely yet. And I'm wondering, you came here much after, and I'm wondering if you had a similar dynamic along the way, or when did you came in the 2000s or 2010s? When did you make the journey over?
So I moved to Canada in 2006. Yes, as a newcomer, my first approach was similar, the way you described, just presenting your best and kind of pretending that you know everything. But very soon I realized that that is actually not the path to follow. When we come to a different country, there's a little setup, which is awaiting for you. And you have two choices. You live in that system forever, all your life, or you come out of that system and follow your own path. I decided that is not the way for my own personal growth, to learn about the country, to learn about the people, and also to learn about myself too. Because if I pretend forever that I'm good, I'm just safe in that little bit circle of family or friends, then I would be limiting myself. I wouldn't be learning anything new.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I arrived in the 80s, I was about 11 years old. And for the first, I'd say, 7 or 8 years, I lived in that first system that you talked about, in that you're very much doing things as people expect new immigrants to do. The only difference was that my parents came from this mindset that they didn't want to remain connected to the past at all. So the Arabic we had learned, that all slowly disappeared, and we stopped using it. They didn't want to use it with us. And but at the same time, the English society, Canadian society, wasn't really letting us in. So they ended up in this kind of middle ground where there's no past, no community to connect to, and then there's also no connection to the new community as well. And it began to create this division between me and my parents at that point, and I eventually had to move away for that reason. I came back to Montreal. My parents are still north of Toronto to live that different life, the alternative that you mentioned, the second approach, where you allow vulnerability into your life, and you take different chances and you take risks, which is something that is very hard for immigrants to do, to take risks after the risks they've taken in moving here in the first place. And so it created this not only a cultural division, but a generational division that led to a lot of what I consider to be the negativity I held on to for the next 2 decades in my life. And it was a negativity that fueled a lot of good things. I wrote some good books out of it, and it was a chip on my shoulder. But the older I got, the more I found that it was limiting at the same time. It made me predictable. And so this book and its move towards optimism goes all the way back to those early episodes, and breaking out of that mold that you speak of, and finding your own way, and the roundabout journey it takes. It's not a straight line, but it's almost like the edges of a circle. You're taking a very long way to get to where you're going, but you get there.
I was able to connect very well. So, as someone from the Yukon territory, I could relate to much of the novel setting during cold and powerful Montreal winters. Uh, how was this element important to Hotline?
I wanted to reflect that because one of my first bad memories of being in Canada was having to wait at a bus stop for a school bus to show up in minus 32-degree weather, and the bus being late. And it was our first year. I was standing there with my sister, and we were both, not prepared. We didn't have the right clothes for it. The wind was gusting. The sun hadn't even really come up. It was like 7:30 in the morning on one of those really cold, dark days of winter. And I was just remember thinking, 6 months ago, I was still in Dubai and then Greece before that. And we had seen snow maybe once every 4 years. It would happen for a day, and then it would melt by the end of the day. And winter was a much different experience. So the weather felt like a character in my life at the time, and the obstacles it creates. It's an interesting character because amongst all the characters that represent Canada, it is the least discriminatory, and in that it's unfair to everyone. Everyone shares this feeling, and we are all equally burdened by winter. So it has a way of hurting us all, but bringing us all together. We all talk about winter in a very revelatory way, and that we've endured it and we've made it through, and somehow it's made us stronger. It's given us character to do so. So I always find that interesting that we have these conversations that are very specific to this country. I've been curious this whole time, actually, since I found out that you were championing the book, why you decided on Yukon of all places, speaking of winter, to settle in.
Mine is an interesting journey. After I immigrated to Canada, I lived in many places, in different provinces, and I became Canadian citizen in 2011. So when I was becoming Canadian citizen, I was going through a big reflection how much I knew about Canada. I knew about big cities like Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, but I was questioning myself how much I knew about small communities, villages, towns, indigenous communities. Because myself, I was born and raised in a village in Punjab, so I'm always being close to villages or rural life. Um, so I decided to go on a journey, and when I was traveling, of course, I came to the Yukon. And when I came to the Yukon, I did not know any single person here. And the very first day, me in the Yukon, I met some people, and they invited me to their gathering. It was a gathering outside in a campground, very wonderful sort of cultural gathering. And people were playing music, dancing, people were telling stories. And there was fire too. And I felt great. I felt connected to those people, and felt that, hey, it feels like my village in Punjab where I grew up. Um, that created a sense of belonging with the Yukon, with the people, the communities here. Very first day, um, and that uh, planted first seed in my heart uh, to think of living in the Yukon, but also a cabin in the wilderness, further away from the population, further away from the town, the city of Whitehorse, so that I could stay close to the nature. So yeah, that belonging, that connectedness, which I felt here, which I didn't feel. Although the bigger cities like Vancouver, Toronto, they are great too in many ways, but somehow I missed that feeling of connecting with people, communicating uh, at a deeper level. So I felt that Yukon provided me that.
I mean, it's funny that I mean, you talk about finding the same sense of community that Muna finds in the book, and you're right that it's more difficult in cities because cities have a lot more going on. The pace of life is quite different, right? And there's more hierarchy in cities, and yet if you find your way out to smaller communities, it kind of flattens that line a little bit, and all of a sudden you can talk to people individual to individual. Was it always as inviting as it was in those first moments for you, or did you have other experiences as well in parallel?
I had some experiences when uh, I was judged based on my look or based on where I come from. Um, but then I decided to go with hope, to go with joy and positivity. Although those moments also, I felt they were also great in my own learning. When I think about racism, when I think about the barriers, when I think about different other things which you described in your book, what Mona is also experiencing. Because if those experiences did not occur to me, probably I wouldn't be able to relate. But I also received a lots and lots of love from the people of the Yukon, and wonderful people, very embracing, very inclusive. Um, so when I decided to go which way, I decided that. No, I will choose hope. I will choose positivity, and I will take those moments to create some awareness to several people who in my initial years in the Yukon, uh, they didn't recognize me correctly, but later on in later years they formed friendships with me, and they told me that their initial reactions were not right, and it made me happy that somehow even in my videos I talk mostly about joy, hope, and positivity, but it also brought that education, that learning to them, those people, and it helped opening their hearts, opening their minds. It also helped connecting people, despite their background, despite the way they come from.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that's what Muna goes through in the book as well, and what I went through as well, and that at some point you have that choice to make, right? You decide, well, I'm going to be either a hopeful person or I'm going to choose to let this hate manifest, and to let this negativity manifest. And both are equal choices, but one of them brings you down as a person, right? It curdles you inside, and it makes your inner life very tumultuous. Whereas the other one allows you to become a teacher by example to others. And I see that more. The older I get, the more I live here, the more, especially since I lived with this book for a while, that it's hope is a more difficult path. Hate is the easier impulse, but it's definitely the more rewarding path as well, to hold on to positivity, because you're the one who has to live with it at the end, right?
Yeah, you're correct. Like our human mindset is hardwired to choose negativity. We are very easy to pick criticism, where very easily choose a path which could be destructive. Sometimes those situations are valid too. Those situations are real too. But at the same time, choosing hope, even it's a difficult, could lead to really really wonderful results. As you mentioned, it can make you a teacher. It can set many many examples. It can change many other people's perspectives and opinions as well. It can shift the whole community, the way they look at each other, and eventually it can form really wonderful interracial, cross-cultural bridges. So yeah, choosing hope is difficult, but it's great.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think this is ultimately what the message in the book that I wanted to convey, is that having a hopeful outlook doesn't make all of society's negatives disappear. They're still there. They're going to grow stronger even while they're there. But you do have a choice between being consumed by it, letting it consume you and falling into it, you melt away, disappear, or holding on to your sense of self, and preserving that. And really, hope is the solution for that.